Ukraine's latest strikes have pushed deep into Russian territory, targeting the refineries that fuel Putin's war machine. Now, nearly 40% of Russia's refining capacity is reportedly offline, and fuel shortages are spreading across the country. We'll break down how Ukraine's new strategy is hitting Russia's economy and potentially threatening Putin's grip on his population. Even as President Zelensky met with President Trump last week in Washington to try and obtain Tomahawk missiles, Ukraine's offensive against Russia's oil infrastructure, the lifeblood, of course, of its economy, reached a new level. As we've been tracking here on the PDB, Ukrainian drones are now targeting the refineries and fuel depots that keep Vladimir Putin's war machine running. And over the weekend, those strikes reached as far as 1,500 kilometers beyond the front lines. One of the most significant strikes came in the Samara region, where explosions rocked the Novokubishevsk refinery, one of Russia's largest, with an annual capacity of nearly 5 million tons. Ukrainian officials say the site directly supports Russia's military logistics. And that wasn't the only big hit in recent days. Drones also struck refineries in the neighboring Orenburg region, crippling elements responsible for processing and distributing diesel fuel to the Russian army. At this point, analysts estimate that nearly 40%, that's 40% of Russia's refining capacity has now been affected, at least temporarily, by the Ukrainian attacks. To put that in perspective, imagine if 40% of America's refineries went offline. Well, of course, gas prices would spike overnight, supply chains would seize up coast to coast, and gas station pumps would run dry. And that's exactly what appears to be happening in Russia, where the damage is now rippling through the economy and into daily life. According to new reporting from the Ukrainian outlet PRM, fuel shortages have now been recorded in 84% of Russia's federal regions. Gasoline and diesel are vanishing from stations across the country. In some areas, lines stretch for blocks. Others have resorted to rationing or shutting down entirely. Drivers in Siberia and central Russia are complaining of hour-long waits, only to be told that the tanks are empty. The government in Moscow insists there's no crisis, blaming temporary logistical disruptions. Nothing to see here, but that explanation is wearing thin. Russian motorists are watching fuel prices spike to levels not seen in years, and reports of diluted gasoline mixed with lower-grade fuels to stretch supply are surfacing nationwide. For the Kremlin, this is a problem that propaganda can't easily paper over. Fuel is central, of course, to Russia's economy, as it is to most economies. And just like everywhere else, it moves everything from food, raw materials, and pharmaceuticals to, in Russia's case, equipment and soldiers for Putin's war effort. And now, the shortages are hitting the same civilian regions that were once insulated from the war's direct effects. That erosion of normalcy, of everyday convenience, is exactly what Ukraine is banking on. By targeting refineries, Kyiv isn't just destroying infrastructure. It's forcing ordinary Russians to feel the cost of a war that their government promised would remain far away. It's also tightening the economic noose. Fewer refineries mean, of course, reduced exports, shrinking tax revenues, and putting increased pressure on the ruble. Already, analysts say that domestic fuel prices could jump another 20% before winter, adding strain to supply chains and inflation already at double digits. Putin has tried to soften the blow by tapping into emergency reserves and ordering state oil giants to redirect exports for domestic use. But those are stopgap measures, and they come with consequences. Cutting exports means less foreign currency coming in, and even inside Russia, the logistics of moving refined fuel hundreds of miles inland from undamaged plants create bottlenecks that can't be solved overnight. Meanwhile, Ukraine's long-range campaign shows no signs of slowing. Each successful strike amplifies the perception that Russia's vast territory, once seen as untouchable, is now vulnerable. And while Moscow's air defenses have intercepted many of the drones, they haven't stopped the broader trend, an expanding war that's now bleeding into Russia's own economic core. There's also, of course, a psychological impact. For months, the Kremlin has maintained that life in Russia remains stable despite the war, that the fighting is somehow distant and it's under control. But when citizens can't fill their cars or truckers can't deliver goods, that illusion, of course, weakens. Even local officials in some regions have begun urging the government to prioritize civilian fuel supplies over military needs. It's a rare public acknowledgement of strain within the system. For now, Russia still has the resources to absorb the hits. It remains one of the world's largest energy producers, and state control over the oil sector gives Putin significant leverage to manage distribution. But the pressure is building. The deeper Ukraine strikes, the more visible the cracks become, not just in Russia's infrastructure, but in the image of competence and control that Putin counts on to maintain his grip on the Kremlin. As an aside, for more on how these strikes are reshaping Russia's economy, I spoke with Jason J. Smart of the Kyiv Post on this past weekend's Situation Report. Check it out if you haven't already. You can find it, of course, on our YouTube channel, at President's Daily Brief, and podcast platforms everywhere. All right, coming up after the break, Trump cuts off aid to Colombia, calling its president a, quote, drug leader. And Iran officially scraps that 2015 nuclear deal as Europe reimposes sanctions. I'll be right back. Hey, Mike Baker here. You know, before Ridge wallets came along, I carried this big, giant, worn-out leather brick of a wallet in my back pocket. It was bulky, it was uneven, and honestly a pain, literally. Switching to Ridge completely changed the game. Their wallets are slim, they're modern, and tough enough to hold up to 12 cards plus cash, if anybody still carries cash, made from premium materials like aluminum, titanium, and carbon fiber. There's got over 50 colors and styles, which means you can literally pick one that fits your personality. Ridge wallets also come with RFID blocking technology, and that's important for peace of mind, and there's also a lifetime warranty. So as far as I'm concerned, this Ridge wallet is the last wallet I'll ever have to buy. And over 100,000 five-star reviews back it up. For a limited time, our PDB listeners get 10% off at Ridge by using code PDB at checkout. Just head over to ridge.com and use code PDB, and you're all set. And after your purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them. So do me a favor and tell them the PDB sent you. Welcome back to the PDB. President Trump has taken the gloves off with Colombia, cutting off all American subsidies and labeling leftist President Gustavo Petro, quote, an illegal drug leader in what's fast becoming Washington's latest showdown with Latin America's socialist bloc. In a post on Truth Social, Trump accused Petro of, quote, strongly encouraging the massive production of drugs in big and small fields all over Colombia. The move marks a sharp rupture with one of Washington's oldest South American allies, as Trump criticizes Bogotá's total failure to stem the tide of narcotics flooding north. According to U.S. government data, Washington sent more than $740 million to Colombia in 2023. Those checks have now stopped. Trump posted, quote, President Petro does nothing, making it clear that the U.S. will no longer pay for his perceived failures. Now, the rupture isn't a surprise. In fact, it's been building for quite some time. Petro accused the American military just last month of committing, in his words, quote, murder after a strike destroyed a boat in Colombian waters. Washington said it was targeting a narcotics vessel. Petro claimed that the craft was a fishing vessel and exhibited a distress signal and demanded, quote, explanations from the U.S. Trump dismissed Petro's accusations outright, calling the strike part of his broader campaign to stop the poison flowing from Colombia, Venezuela, and other Latin American countries into U.S. communities. As we've been monitoring, the operation was one of at least 7 strikes in the Caribbean in recent weeks, leaving at least 27 traffickers killed and 2 captured. Also, behind Trump's anger lies Colombia's crumbling anti-narcotics record. In September, the U.S. formally ruled that Colombia failed to meet its drug control obligations under the Foreign Assistance Act, a law that ties aid to cooperation in combating trafficking. The State Department issued a waiver, but Trump made clear that the leniency ended. Under Petro's leftist government, cocaine production surged to record highs. Vast coca fields stretch across rural provinces, flourishing despite repeated U.S. warnings. Washington has long accused Bogotá of turning a blind eye to traffickers, charges that Petro continues to deny. Colombia's response to Trump's move was defiant. On Monday, Bogotá recalled its ambassador to Washington, calling Trump's accusation of Petro overseeing drug trafficking, quote, offensive and false. But the president has doubled down, blasting Petro as, quote, a lunatic. Oh, and the worst president they've ever had. He hinted that new tariffs could follow, warning that Colombia's current 10% baseline import rate might soon rise if Petro continues to betray the fight against drug production and smuggling. And that fallout could be severe. Colombia posted a near $340 million trade deficit with the U.S. just between January and July, and Washington remains its largest trading partner, absorbing some 35% of Colombian exports. Roughly 70% of goods that Colombia buys from the U.S. aren't produced domestically, leaving its economy deeply dependent on American supply chains. The subsidy cutoff also fits a larger pattern. Earlier this year, Washington shuttered U.S. aid's regional operations across Latin America, signaling a broader rollback of foreign aid in a tougher line on regimes that Trump views as hostile or negligent. It's a sharp turn in policy, one that puts Colombia's leftist government on notice and reasserts Washington's leverage in a region long plagued by narco-politics. Okay, shifting to the Middle East. After a decade of fragile diplomacy, broken promises, less than transparent inspection protocols, and a buildup in highly enriched uranium, the 2015 Iran nuclear deal is no more, declared null and void by Tehran amid Europe's snapback sanctions. The mullahs boast now that they're free to ramp up their nuclear ambitions, which of course they were ramping up even while the 2015 agreement existed. Over the weekend, Tehran, backed by Moscow and Beijing, oh look, there's a shock, formally notified the UN that the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, because of course it had to have an acronym, effectively ended, axing the Security Council's oversight of the Islamic regime's nuclear program, such as it was. The announcement marks a sharp turn away from the framework that once stood as the West's signature attempt to restrain Iran's nuclear pursuit through diplomacy rather than force. In a statement, Iran's foreign ministry said all provisions and restrictions under the deal, quote, are considered terminated, though it still, quote, expresses its commitment to diplomacy. Of course it does. It's a familiar move for Tehran, burning down the deal while claiming to keep the door open for talks. Looking back 10 years ago, the JCPOA, signed in Vienna under former President Obama by Iran, China, Britain, France, Germany, Russia, and the U.S., was hailed as a triumph of multilateral diplomacy. Sanctions relief on the regime in exchange for limits on uranium enrichment. But those limits eroded quickly. The accord began to crumble in 2018 when President Trump, during his first term, made the decisive call to withdraw the U.S. and reinstate sanctions on the mullahs, arguing that the deal merely postponed, not prevented, Iran's path to a nuclear weapon. Not to mention that the deal didn't allow for full transparency. Written into that deal were limits on what and where the watchdog inspectors could inspect. The move reshaped the region's power dynamics, reasserted American leverage, and exposed Europe's inability to enforce compliance without Washington's leadership. Since then, Iran has enriched uranium well beyond agreed limits, blocked international inspectors from its facilities, and deepened its ties with Russia and China. After the 12-day war in June, when Israeli and American airstrikes struck the regime's nuclear facilities, the Iranian parliament voted to cut cooperation with the IAEA entirely. Shortly after, Europe's patience evaporated in late August when Britain, France, and Germany triggered the snapback mechanism to reimpose UN sanctions, accusing the mullahs of systematic violations. The decision, grounded in UN Resolution 2231, the measure that codified the deal's enforcement, rendered the JCPOA's 18 October expiration date a little more than a formality. Iran, Russia, and China fired back, calling the European decision, quote, legally and procedurally flawed. In their joint letter to the UN, they claimed it was Europe, not the Iranian regime, that had, quote, ceased to perform its commitments. The trio also warned against, quote, unilateral sanctions or threats of force, urging instead a political settlement, quote, based on mutual respect, of course, an irony not lost on Western capitals. Europe, meanwhile, is still striking a note of caution. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas said sanctions, quote, must not be the end of diplomacy, warning that a sustainable solution can only be achieved through negotiations. President Trump said yesterday he still seeks a peace deal with Iran, but will not negotiate under threat. The mullahs say they're open to talks. Look at everybody's talking, provided Washington guarantees against military action during any future negotiations. Okay, coming up in the back of the brief, the U.S. government shutdown grinds on, now ranking among the longest in U.S. history as talks remain deadlocked. Now, luckily, the members of the Senate and Congress are still getting paid. You'd hate to see them go without. More on that when we come back. Hey, Mike Baker here. Let me take just a moment to talk about your personal finances. Now, as you may have noticed, the cost of everything is still, too high. And many folks have been relying on credit cards to cover the essentials. If that debt is piling up for you, you're not alone. Americans collectively, get this, owe over $1 trillion with a T in credit card debt. That's incredible. You might have considered reaching out to my friends at American Financing by now, but perhaps you hesitated because you don't want to give up your low mortgage rate. Well, there is good news. They've created what they call the Smart Equity Loan. It's a solution designed to help you take control of your finances without touching your current mortgage. Unlike a HELOC, which can have varied interest rates, the Smart Equity Loan from American Financing offers a fixed rate, and that means one predictable monthly payment, giving you peace of mind. The loan allows you to leverage the equity in your home to pay off high-interest debt or free up your cash flow and keep your existing low mortgage rate intact. It only takes 10 minutes to get started, with no upfront or hidden fees, and that's very important. Call American Financing today and start saving now. 866-885-1881. That's 866-885-1881. Or visit AmericanFinancing.net/PDB. In today's back of the brief, the U.S. government shutdown has officially become the third longest in modern history, stretching into its 21st day with no clear end in sight. Only the shutdowns of 1995 and 2018 to 19 have lasted longer. The shutdown of 1995. I remember it well. I was working for the CIA overseas at the time, of course, and despite my best efforts, was deemed essential and had to keep working. Now, if you're keeping score, this latest impasse began when Congress failed to pass a funding bill at the start of the month. Lawmakers remain deadlocked over competing spending priorities, while hundreds of thousands of federal workers either sit idle or continue working without pay. National parks remain closed, non-essential agencies are shuttered, and many federal services, from passport processing to loan assistance, are either halted or severely delayed. The White House says essential operations like Social Security payments, air traffic control, and the military remain funded, but the economic drag is growing with each passing day. Economists estimate that the shutdown is now costing the U.S. economy roughly 0.1% of GDP per week. Now, that may not sound like much, but the longer the stalemate continues, the more the damage compounds, particularly for contractors and small businesses and federal employees who rely on steady paychecks. There's also a growing political cost. Public frustration is rising as the stalemate drags on, and both parties are blaming the other for the breakdown. Why, that's a sort of unheard of behavior in Washington, D.C., both parties blaming the other. Congressional leaders have traded accusations of political theater, while negotiations between the House and Senate have made little progress. But look, I don't want to leave you on a completely negative note. There may be a glimmer of hope behind the scenes. Yesterday, White House economic advisor Kevin Hassett told CNBC he believes the shutdown, quote, is likely to end sometime this week. He described ongoing back-channel talks between lawmakers and administration officials as, quote, constructive, suggesting that there may be enough common ground emerging to break the impasse. If that optimism proves right, we could see federal workers back on the job and agencies reopen within days. But if the deal falls apart, or if partisan bickering resumes, and what are the odds of that, this shutdown could easily edge closer to those historic records from 2018 and 1995. Either way, tomorrow will mark day 22, and another reminder of how expensive Washington's gridlock can be. Now, for what it's worth, my own theory is that there was no way that the Democrats would agree to compromise with the Trump White House until after the grand nationwide performative art exercise known as the No Kings protests. The last thing Democrat politicians wanted was to be criticized by angst-ridden mobs of protest-goers because they worked with Trump to reopen the government. Not to mention that the politicians were slobbering for an opportunity to get out in front of the crowds and profess their hatred of Trump and their fealty to their progressive base. So, again, just my theory, But now that the dust has settled and the inflatable costumes have been deflated and the witty posters have been stuck in the basement until, well, the next protest, and the brave masses have self-righteously defied their imaginary king, I think the Democrat politicians will compromise and the government will reopen. It's just a theory. And that, my friends, is the President's Daily Brief for Tuesday, the 21st of October. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out to me at pdb@thefirsttv.com. And don't forget, if you'd like to partake of this podcast ad-free, you can certainly do that. And it's easy. Just become a premium member of the President's Daily Brief by visiting pdbpremium.com. I'm Mike Baker, and I'll be back later today with the PDB Afternoon Bulletin. Until then, stay informed, stay safe, stay cool. Hey, Mike Baker here, with an exciting offer from our friends over at Birch Gold Group, the precious metals specialists. Now you can buy gold and get free silver. That sounds pretty good. That's right. For every $5,000 purchased from Birch Gold Group this month in advance of Veterans Day, they'll send you a free patriotic silver round that commemorates the Gadsden and American flags. Look, gold is up over 40% since the beginning of this year, hitting record highs, and Birch Gold can help you diversify into gold by converting an existing IRA or 401k into a tax-sheltered IRA in physical gold. Plus, they'll send you free silver honoring our veterans on qualifying purchases. And if you're current or former military, Birch Gold has a special offer just for you. They're waiving custodial fees on the first year on investments of any amount. With an A-plus rating with the Better Business Bureau and tens of thousands of happy customers, including many PDB listeners, I encourage you to talk with Birch Gold about diversifying your savings into gold. Again, text PDB to the number 989-898 for a free information kit and to claim your eligibility for free silver with a qualifying purchase before the end of the month. Again, that's PDB to 989-898. Give Birch Gold a call today.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and leave a comment, a really positive, nice, and kind comment. That would be appreciated. And if you're not already subscribed to our channel, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our daily updates.